think I just realized I wasn't recording anything. Of course, that would be the one thing that I would mess up.
There we go. We can start again from the beginning. We are good with that.
Hello, everybody. I am Andrew Stevens, author of Cycle of the Awakening, and welcome to my author interview series where we dive back deep into the beginnings of the careers of a handful of authors. We are starting with a bunch of indie authors initially, about what things were kind of like in the beginning, and so that we can understand, because it was a slightly selfish reason for me to want to understand all of these feelings that I'm feeling as a new author, and if they're normal, and just to see what other authors' journeys were like, but also for fans of these authors who may not have known what things were like in the early days, and getting to see kind of that picture of these authors in their early careers. So without further ado, kicking off this whole series, we have the awesome Andy PELOQUIN, who's written some cool books, and we're going to talk to him today about that. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Andy PELOQUIN, the author of Darkblade and other series. I've got, we're calling it 45 books because then I don't have to count again for a while. I have been writing off. I hit my 10-year anniversary of publishing in July of last year. That was when my first book came out, and it's been a pretty wild ride ever since.
Sweet. All right. So now that we just got a little bit of a taste of who you are, let's go back into some of the questions. We'll get started at the very beginning. So what exactly was it that set you on this author path? Were there any initial inspirations or drivers that pushed you towards writing?
So I come from a very artistic family. My dad is a musician. My mom is a writer. My brothers and sisters are graphic designers and artists, and everybody's very, very artistic. And I have zero artistic skill. I do a mean stick figure, but that's about it. And when I was growing up, there was a teacher who was very passionate about the arts and sciences, and writing was among those things. And I discovered that I really enjoyed it, and I was as good at it as a 10 to 12-year-old could be. And so I kind of dabbled in that off and on throughout my adolescence. When I was around 15, 16, I found myself with a lot of free time and a computer that had no internet, no video games, and nothing but Microsoft Paint and Microsoft Word. So I suppose it was kind of written in the stars at that point. But it wasn't until I was in my sort of mid-20s that I was doing copywriting, freelance copywriting at the time, blog posts and such. And I realized that as a freelancer, you want to eat, you got to keep working. And I couldn't see myself writing, shitty news articles or web pages and stuff for my entire life. So I figured, I loved writing fiction and stories as a kid. Let's take a crack at it now. And so I wrote the graphic novel script that was titled The Last March of the 13th Rifles. It's basically 300 meets the Chain of Dogs from Malazan, where it's this company of dwarven riflemen marching to their death. And knowing that they were all marching to their death, the thing that I knew was that I had to make each of those deaths matter and hurt and really, really suck, so that the reader suffered through it and felt the impact of it. And I fell in love with that. And I think that's probably what led me down the path of dark fantasy, is just knowing that I could make people hurt and they would love me for it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things about dark fantasy, especially, is like a lot of bad stuff happens, but you still have to figure out that way to make readers care. In any book, emotions are important, but I think there's a certain art form to, taking those like really dark circumstances and still saying you're going to care about this, what's happening. So yeah.
100%.
All right, cool. So so that's what sets you on the path. Now let's get started on the actual path itself. So Blade of the Destroyer and the Darkblade series, where did the inspiration for this series come from? And where did it kind of become a story?
So I had read I've read a lot of stories. I grew up reading fantasy, and I read a few that really kind of tickled the creative part of my brain. Where there was Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan, where there's almost this kind of cool, badass edginess to the character, and then the Icewind Dale series, the Forgotten Realms, Driftsteward and Artemis and Trary. There was something so cool about them, but it wasn't until Night Angel that I was like, oh my god, this is it. So Night Angel is the story of a young street rat who basically gets taken in by this assassin and trained to be an assassin. And that was the story that I fell in love with it. Not the street rat kid, don't like him at all, but the badass assassin. He has all the cool one-liners. He is like aura farming to the max. He is just so cool. Everybody's afraid of him. And this is the character that I wanted to write. And I just loved that so much. And so I started off by writing it out as a graphic novel script because I had written this last March of the 13th Rifles as a graphic novel. So that was what I was familiar with. But then I realized that I would probably be better turned into a novel because then I could really flesh out the character and make it cool. And so I did that, and I just kind of fell in love with the humanity underlying the character instead of just I'm a badass and I do dark things, which is much more comic book focused, but having a reason to explore what's underneath that really connected me to the character. And it's why Darkblade continues to be the series that I'm best known for. It's going to be 15 books long. It just is me on a page.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I like the idea of kind of peeling back the layers there. Shrek, so to speak, but really getting to the heart of like a character. Yeah, and like you said, like the comics are really good at showing like the badassness, but with a book you can really dig in deep there.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I've always loved about books is that, like, I don't really love books that have a massive cast of characters. I want a book that'll focus on one. Sometimes two or three is fine, but really one. Give me all that I need to know about them. Tell me the world through their eyes. Give me a look at their experiences. If you look at the majority of the books on my shelf, the ones that I really, really love, probably 8 or 9 out of 10 are single character, or just really they go really deep on one character.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's fair enough. I think we kind of already touched on the next question, but as far as like for the character itself, you mentioned a couple books. Was there any other inspirations as far as that character that you brought in, maybe people you knew or even a bit of yourself?
So it wasn't so much people I knew, but there was this one episode of Criminal Minds, the TV show, that just worked for me. So my wife and we watched Criminal Minds for years and years, and a lot of times the characters were really interesting, but it never really made sense to me. And I was still kind of figuring out who the hunter was because I'd written the graphic novel script and I'd written the novel, and I got some early feedback from people saying it's still a little bit shallow to focus on the badass. I don't really understand who this guy is. So I did a lot of research into assassins, and the Secret Service put out a paper years and years ago from interviews that they conducted with assassins that really just like broke down and quantified the 8 different types of assassins and the motivations and the things that drove them. And I loved that. And it was really good information. I was kind of studying that. And then this one episode of Criminal Minds where the character, that the villain of the week, he's a serial killer because he hears the voice of his father in his mind, and the only time his father shuts up is after he kills somebody. So he kills people to try to get peace. And I was like, whoa, that is such a cool thing because it changes the guy from like a sociopath, psychopath, bloodthirsty monster to somebody who's almost like a victim of their own psychology. And I loved that because that was something that I could play with. I could play with that. Yes, you're a killer, but you're also a victim. You're struggling with yourself. And that for me was probably the most important discovery for the character, was this thing of you kill to silence the voice in your head until it comes back. And it's that push and pull, that struggle. And that really mirrored a character who I loved, the Driftsteward from Icewind Dale. There's this push and pull between him and Artemis Entreri, where he's trying to be a hero, Artemis Entreri is trying to be the biggest badass assassin, and they're like Art Entreri is just always coming after him, and there is this struggle between humanity and brutality, morality and ruthlessness, and just that inspiration paired with the voices in the head and the fucked up psychology, it was just sort of the perfect storm of making this character come to life.
Yeah, I do remember reading those books, and like Dritz was always the focal, and I love the cast of characters, but Artemis was always that, just like, he's just cool. Anytime he shows up, he's cool.
Shit is getting real when he shows up. People are dying. Things like Dritz's gonna get fucked up, or Entreri is gonna get fucked up. One of the two things is gonna happen, and it's gonna be glorious. That was the thing, like that feeling that I took away from the story.
Nice. All right, so we already talked about, you said you've been publishing for 10 years now. So 10 years ago, essentially, was where you were at with, and I think we kind of already touched on, what was going on before that. So did you just shift completely from copywriting to writing books full time, or was there kind of a transition there?
Yeah, it was very much a slow build, because so when I released Blade of the Destroyer, I knew that the story that I had written was good, and Darkblade's longevity proves that I had the right perception of it. But I wanted to shop it around to publishers. So I sent it to a few agents and didn't hear anything back, and I sent it to a few publishers, and a small press, J. Ellington Ashton, offered to publish it. And I was very excited because I didn't know anything about like the actual marketing and advertising and all of that. So I let them have it. And they did an amazing job of editing and packaging it with the cover that I had made and making sure that it was a great product. And then I moved on to writing the next one. But after a couple of, or while I was waiting to hear back from agents, I wrote the next book. And by the time the book was in the J. Ellington Ashton editorial queue, I was working on the third book. So that's where I was like, okay, I can do this way faster myself than if I went through a publisher. So that was what sort of set me down the path of self-publishing, the speed that I wrote. But I could only do the writing kind of half time because I still had to feed my family and keep the day job. So it was kind of the push and pull, the back and forth between, I want to write more books, but I still got to feed my family. And it wasn't until 2018 that I got the rights to Blade of the Destroyer, which became Darkblade Assassin. When I got the rights back and published it myself, that's when the series took off, and that's when I could like shift a lot more towards writing, not full time. I never really went full time. I always kept a little bit of sort of day job income, because the way that I grew up very, very poor, it was very much, I will never go back there again. So having kind of guaranteed income. And even after, after years and years of successfully publishing, it's still very hard for me to be like, oh, I can just focus on writing and not have some kind of steady income.
Yeah, I know it's definitely volatile. Even authors who've, launched successful books and make, because consistent income from it, like it can just drop off at any point. The next book could just not, you never know.
Yeah. Things change in a heartbeat. For a year or so, there were authors getting banned entirely from Amazon for, whether they were manipulating the rankings or somebody else manipulated the rankings, and they got kind of caught up in the backlash. So it was very much like, don't take risks with your income. Keep day job stuff and then write, and then slowly make the transition. The more money that you're making from the writing, the less you can make from the, that you need to make from the day job, but kind of keep that until you don't have to worry.
Yeah, I know. When I heard that Zeus Diamante, which hopefully I'll get to interview at some point, just kind of went cold turkey, full in writing books that's crazy to me. But, we got that drive and that motivation, and You know,
Yeah.
you never know what could happen.
For some people, that's the only way that they can do it, right?
Yeah.
They basically, it's like Cortez burn the ships behind them. When there's no other path forward, you kind of have to do it. And my hat is off to people like that. I do not have the intestinal fortitude to just be like, yep, I'm going all in on the writing. I'm
Yeah.
very much a cautious person when it comes to finances, but I mean, the fact that Zach has made it work as well as he has proves he made the right choice.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about kind of how things got started, but let's talk about like the feelings that were going through your mind, and maybe your family as well. Like as you were, getting the first, maybe second book written and like trying to find a publisher. I mean, even just the writing process itself of writing a whole book, a lot of, we've all heard the stats of like, only whatever 2% of people will actually follow through, write a whole book and publish it. But what were those feelings like, if you can recall?
So I think a lot of the struggle came down to how much of my time can I actually afford to invest in this, and how much do I need to do other things. So one of the things I will say, we're going to call it a regret that I carry even years later being successful, is that I had to take time away from, let's say, my family to do this. I could not, in my head, I could not attend my kids' school plays because it was during the writing shift. Like, it wasn't at night when it was convenient. It was 11 to 12, and 11 to 12 was the only time that I had to write. So I felt like I had to make that choice a lot, to sacrifice that time with them to write, or they would come home from school in the afternoon and I was writing until 5 or 6 when they would be home for 2 hours or something. So I couldn't have lunch with them. So there was a lot of that. That was probably the biggest struggle. Um, we were doing okay financially with the writing, to where the copywriting and blogging, to where I would get, I would basically pay the bills in the morning, and then the afternoons I could kind of take a little bit of time off to write. Or, sometimes, some days I even got a little bit of the morning and the whole afternoon. So it was kind of that endless juggling act. But yeah, the fact that it was a freelance thing, working freelance and trying to make the writing work, it was always very hard to say, yes, I can afford to take the day off to go and do something extra, or holidays or things like that. Even now, I still don't really have holidays. It's very rare that I get holidays, because I feel like, oh, I need to push this project forward. And it's just probably just a byproduct of skipping or missing so many holidays when I was just starting out.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. One of the things that probably a lot of people don't necessarily consider about indie authors is that, when you get trad published, not saying that those authors work less, but a lot of the pieces of that puzzle, of that project, are being handed off to other people. You got editors, you got people doing the marketing and different stuff like that. So maybe working a full-time job while that's happening is a little bit easier. But with indie authors, like, and that the other thing, like we mentioned with Zach Diamante, is like, he dove full in. So he had full time to like just go crazy and devote all that time. But not everybody can do that. And that's totally okay. We all have to make our own choices at the end of the day. So yeah, it's an interesting insight that, some people just don't consider.
Yeah. And something that this is a factor, something for authors who are going through the sort of the same thing that I went through, and let's say I'm still going through, the how much time to devote to the writing and the building a career versus spending time with your family, is that you could invest all this time, you could gamble away, let's say, your time with your family, and it pays off and you succeed. Or it doesn't pay off, and it doesn't, you don't succeed, you don't make it work, and then you feel the loss more keenly. This is something you need to be aware of going in. I will say that I'm lucky that my gamble paid off, but that doesn't mean, like, it's still something that I had to be like, okay, yes, I'm making this choice. And even now I do look back and I'm like, I wish I had succeeded earlier, so I could have done more things with my kids, or afforded to do more. And it's just, part of the story that I will carry with me forever.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay, so I think we covered that pretty well. I was going to talk about the writing process, and like how difficult it was to develop the habit. I don't know if that's applicable or not, because you kind of were already writing very consistently for your job. But any additional input there?
Well, so I found that it was almost easier to do that kind of writing, because so when I started out copywriting, I would do sometimes 15,000 words in a day. And this was all like 15,000 words of, how do you reboot your computer when it's frozen on the blue screen of death, or how do you, it just all that kind of internet content that now exists and we take for granted. Some poor schmuck had to write it. Um, and so doing that, I was very accustomed to putting in long hours. So the fact that I could scale back on that kind of writing and then invest that time into what I loved, it was almost like it was part of the exhilaration of the discovery of writing. And so I type around 90 accurate words per minute, and then I can, I've gotten pretty good. I was always fairly good at just kind of bulling through and saying, all right, I'm moving this forward. So I've always been able to write a chapter in an hour and a half to 2.5 hours at most. So it was like sit down, write a chapter, and then move on with something else. So that was kind of the the habit that I developed at writing articles, being able to segue that into writing, where I think I needed the most sort of development was on outlining. When I got into the process of outlining, it was easier for me to just push the story forward. Even though it was incremental, I knew where I was going. So I also don't have a great improvisational brain. Like everything for me is very, very one step, two step, three step. So I'm never going to be a great pantser.
Fair. And that actually kind of, you talking there and explaining that process kind of brought up another question that I didn't have before, but well, like the difference between writing copy where it's very kind of structured, you have a problem or a question, and then you're going through kind of different steps. So it's kind of very just straightforward. Whereas writing a book is creative writing. Obviously you plan things out, but it doesn't always just follow that exact, formula
Yeah.
structure. So was there any kind of pain there of just like learning how to just like come up with things, as you go?
I think where I still struggle to this day is coming up with like the set pieces, right? We're going into a throne room. What does the throne look like? How big is this room? I don't care about those things beyond what's needed for the scene. I want to get to the meat and potatoes, which is the people and the action and all of that.
Yeah.
But I do think something that translated really well is, like you said, the structure of an article was introduce a problem, ask a question to get people interested, go through the information, and then summarize. Well, you do that kind of in a chapter. Your chapter is, you start off with, all right, here's the existing location, here's the setting, here's the current problem or conflict or whatever it is. And then you start having this back and forth between, here's this information, here's what I need from you, here's what I want from you, here's the obstacle, how do we deal with it? And then you kind of sum up the chapter, or you end the chapter with a conclusion of sorts, or as I learned to do years ago, a conclusion that leads to a hook for the next chapter, or you just end it on a hook and then set up for the next chapter to continue with that thing. But there is kind of a formula to chapters, or at least I feel that there is a rhythm to chapters that I developed naturally. And I think that's as a direct result of doing the copywriting, of having that very structured thing. So right now, if I could probably point to any one of my chapters, and I could almost draw for you like a wave of the rhythm that the chapters have as a result of that.
Okay. That's an interesting point, and it totally makes sense.
I think something that a lot of authors fail to realize, or maybe they don't even understand that it's a thing, and I think I discovered it by accident, is that there is a rhythm to things. Writing has to have a rhythm in like separate from the, you know, varying up the sentence lengths and adding the, I'm not talking on a paragraph level. I'm talking on a chapter level, a plot level. And this is one reason that my books end up getting so long, is that when you have a scene and there's an obstacle, it can't just be scene, obstacle, solution. It's got to be scene, obstacle, maybe a little bit of a back and forth, pushing the obstacle forward. Don't find a solution yet. Another obstacle. Oh, maybe take a step back, move a bit forward. And there's this kind of forward and backward. And you do that, and it creates this steady climactic wave that eventually crescendos. And this is something that people don't necessarily understand on a like a technical level, but the Sanderson Sanderlanche, he does this really, really well in his best books, is that he gives you this kind of one step forward, half step back, 1.5 step forwards, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And it's this kind of this inhale and exhale that it builds and it builds and it gets your pulse spiking, but there is a natural flow to it that is not on a sentence level, but on a, like a, let's say he's doing a battle scene. The army charges forward. There's the first clash. There's the struggle. There's the lock. And then somebody's got to move. Maybe there's a step back or a step forward. And then all of a sudden there's something over here. And there is just this rhythm to it, this flow, that when it lacks it, the story feels kind of flat. And when it's there, it gives you that kick in your teeth epic moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. That push and pull, definitely. Yeah, and it all does kind of tie back into the emotions that we were talking about before, of like, you know, the point of the story is to get the readers invested, so that, you know, you're like, oh, something good, and then wait, and then, you know, so they're constantly like, you know, they have like an idea of where the story's headed, but you're constantly keeping them like guessing, so to speak, too.
And I think like something that I find, one reason that my books go long is the conversations. I don't know how many conversations that you have, like with let's say people that you meet, how many of them go straight from hello to I need you to go kill my enemy. It takes a second for you to kind of walk through the steps of a conversation. Or it's not like, hello, now let me tell you why I'm actually feeling this way. Or hello, let me tell you my grand plan. Everything is kind of this slow one step forward, this sort of incremental progress until you get to the thing. I tend to really enjoy sort of the Freudian slip, where the character says something kind of like it bursts free of them. They fail to control it, or they say something that reveals some insight about them, and then the character sort of latches onto that and then says something and pushes it forward. But again, it can't just be like from one to the heart of the matter. It takes this step-by-step process. And so I envy the authors who can be like very, very terse and succinct in doing that. Jay Kristoff does that really well. Sebastian de Castell does it really well. They kind of dance around it in a very succinct way, whereas mine is more like talking around the issue, but in the way that I feel a lot of normal people do, of just talking anywhere else so they don't have to address the issue, which I guess is sort of reflective of people I know in my life who talk like that, as opposed to just very, very succinct.
Yeah, that's fair. Realism, you know, makes a difference. All right, so we talked a lot about the writing. What about the editing process? Because again, I think going back to like the copywriting topic, you know, you have an objective for whatever article you're writing, but with a book, you know, there's objectives, so to speak, but it's not exactly like the same thing. So for you, you know, how did the initial editing work? Did it take some time to kind of figure that cadence out?
So I will say that I've been super fortunate in that I really only had 3 editors. Well, 4, but so when I started writing myself, I hired an editor, somebody, I don't even remember how I found them. It was like, you know, whether it was Fiverr or one of those sort of early days editors. And they did a great job of Blade of the Destroyer before I submitted it to agents and publishers. And then J. Ellington Ashton, they did another editorial pass with their in-house editor who did a good job, but my guy had done a good enough job that there were really only a handful of things that needed tweaking and tightening. And then at a convention in 2015 or 16, I was at this sort of professional mixer, and there was a publisher there who had a table at this thing. And so I had a story that I had written as part of a writer's boot camp, but I was going to self-publish it, or I was going to, aim for an agent. But I just walked up to them and I said, all right, why should I publish with you? And so the CEO of the company, she sat me down, she started talking, and then their editor came over, and it was like a match made in heaven. Like from the beginning, we just hit it off. We spent the entire night talking about literally everything and nothing, and drinking, having a great time. And by the end of that weekend, I signed with their publisher because I wanted to work with him. I loved the way that his attitude towards writing and working with writers. It just clicked with me. And so then I signed with them, and then he did the edit, and he was so good at the edits that I was like over the moon happy. And then after I finished publishing that trilogy with them, I had written something else, and I messaged him and I said, hey, would you ever consider doing this, sort of freelance extra on top of what you're doing? And he's like, oh, for you, absolutely. And so he has edited almost every book that I've written. There was Aethon had their own editor for the Cerberus series, and I think for the Dragon Blood Assassin series, their own in-house editor, which did amazing work. But this one editor, I've worked with him for now 5 out of my 7 series that I've written, and I will, if in a perfect world, I will try to work with him on everything that I write, because he knows me, he knows what I'm trying to do, and he's got really good advice on how to actually do it.
Yeah, I think that's cool, and maybe a little bit lucky to have that kind of just happen like that.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of authors, because they talk about like a book really becomes what it is in the editing phases, because generally your first draft is, you might be a pony and just write like an amazing product right out the gate, but most people probably not. So the editing is where you're really going to find that, and finding a good editor that's going to help you get to where you want to go it's difficult, and you never know what you're going to get. And it's always like, one of the questions I've had is like, I found my editor, I think it worked well working with her, but I've since found another editor that I really like online that I follow for different reasons. They have a YouTube channel and stuff, and you always like wonder, like, would it be better working with this editor versus the one I already started with? And I don't have like a valid reason. It's just like, what's it like with a different editor? And like, do you test out different editors? I don't know.
That's what I do. If there's an editor so sometimes I will have editors, let's say, who are my friends or who are trying to get started, and they ask me, do you need an editor? Or do you have, can you recommend anybody? I often write short stories for anthologies. I have, short pieces of fiction, so I will have them do it. And it's kind of my way of saying, are you the kind of person I want to work with? I see what kind of things they catch. I see what they call attention to, how much they try to change the flavor of my writing versus, fixing up grammatical errors. Or even, I tend to start my sentences with ands and buts all the time. And if an editor calls that out, then it does lead me to question, do they understand the way that I write? That's not to say it's the wrong thing. I'm sure that if I work with another editor, they would kick my ass till I'm blue in the face. But a good editor, they kind of say, okay, this is what the author's trying to do. Here's the tone of their writing, the flavor of their writing. Let's fix it without changing it. So I've let's say, auditioned, I don't know, 3 or 4 different editors and recommended them to other people because I love my editor. But if you see an editor who you like, give them a piece of short fiction. I'm sure you can whip out a 10,000 word short story for something, whether you want to put for an anthology or a prequel novella for your series. Write something to test them out. and then see how you feel working with them. And if you like them, well, there you go. There's no reason that you shouldn't follow that instinct, because there is some instinct that's telling you they're probably a pretty good match for who I am, and it may be worth exploring.
Okay, interesting. All right, cool. So that covers editing. So let's skip ahead here about to after your first book was published and you were working on the next ones. As far as like every author sends their book out into the world, and then it's kind of that waiting period of like, how's it going to be received? What are the reviews going to be like? So what were kind of those initial months and maybe even that first year after you published your first book like, if you can recall, like feelings going through your head, how were early reviews and all that?
Yeah. Let me pop up Blade of the Destroyer on Goodreads, because I'm trying to remember kind of how it was. I mean, so if you look at Blade of the Destroyer right now on Goodreads, it's got around 1,500 reviews, and it's at 3.9 out of 4. That's not super great, but it's also not super terrible for a first book. And it's picked up, like the rating kind of dropped a bit, because when I came back to fix it up to make it into what is now Darkblade, I realized there were a lot of mistakes. But at the time, I was just kind of watching the reviews, because I had sort of self-published something earlier, and the reviews that I had gotten on it, many of them were negative, but constructive criticism. That was like, oh, the character is lacking depth, or the world building is really good, but the pacing is off. And so all of that feedback helped me make Darkblade, or Blade of the Destroyer, as good as I could make it. So I was watching those reviews to see, okay, how are people actually going to receive this? And thankfully, it was overwhelmingly positive. But the critiques that I got, they were super helpful in identifying things that I couldn't go back and change book 1, but I could make sure that book 2 or 3 and beyond were better. So like, for people who are just launching their first back, watch those reviews, read the bad ones, and look for ways that the person who dropped that bad review could be right about the book, because you're probably too close to the trees. Or another thing is that, let's say you put this thing out into the world. Let's say I paint a picture and I use what I think is the perfect shade of blue. To a reader, that's probably aquamarine or green or something. And so they'll be like, what the fuck is this dude painting a blue, a sky that's kind of green? So my perception of something and your perception of something are going to be totally different. So if I love it, but you don't perceive it in the same way, neither one of us is wrong or right. It's just the perception. So if I can understand why you perceived it the way that you did, what about your perception? Maybe I failed to communicate the character clearly, or I failed to build the world as well as I thought, or I failed to pace it well. The more I can understand your perception of the thing that I've created, the better I can do on my next one and my next one. So I know there's sort of a trend of people, on Instagram and TikTok saying, don't read your negative reviews. A lot of them are just trolls and shit posting. No, read every negative review and look for the nugget of value in them. Don't read the positive reviews. You don't need to be told you're amazing. The book sales will tell you you're amazing. If you're amazing, you're going to find out. Look for the ways that you can do better. And the only way that you're going to do that is by reading the 3-star reviews, the 2-star reviews, the 1-star reviews. And it's not, those troll reviews that are like, rubbish, didn't read. No, those are just garbage. But look for the ones that actually have value, because they will make you a better writer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know I was kind of on the fence before I published, because, there's always the debates online of like, should you read reviews or should you not? And I think it really depends on, you as a person and how you can handle some of that stuff. And maybe for some people, maybe it's a good idea to not. But I do see the value in like you just said, like, what are people saying? And, and are there valid critiques that you can take? And, I don't have a ton of reviews yet, but my worst review, I actually took that person and she was an ARC reader. But I actually took her and be like, hey, will you be a beta reader for me? Because you're going to be the person, even if I don't agree with every negative thing she says, she's going to give me I know she's going to give me negative
Yeah.
feedback, and it's all, I mean, largely it's all constructive. So it's,
Yeah.
I think, if you can take those things without taking it personally, because, it's about the book, and yeah, you wrote it, but if you're willing to accept that it's probably not going to be perfect, especially not your first maybe one to couple books, but as long as you're willing to keep improving, then
Yeah.
I think that,
And
yeah,
this is where we as the artists need to step back from the art.
yeah,
We need to separate ourselves from our art, because like I could not write Darkblade book 1 today. I am not the same human being that I was when I wrote Darkblade book 1.
yeah,
So I am still the same artist. I am still the same, we're going to say the same human being, but I have evolved. My writing style has changed. My view of the world has changed. So basically think of a book like a photograph. It's a snapshot of who you are at the specific time in your life that you wrote it. It is a snapshot of your skill. It is a snapshot of your worldview, your understanding of characters, your understanding of writing. It is just a photograph. Photographs can be ugly, they can be beautiful, they can be award winning, they can win you, whatever the opposite of the Ig Nobel Peace Prize, right? They can be terrible, but it's just a snapshot. You are the subject of the snapshot because you're the
yeah,
author, but you're also not the snapshot doesn't define who you are. So read those negative reviews, force yourself to read them with the mindset of, okay, when I was the person who put this out, this snapshot, this is the mistakes that I've made. This is the ways that I needed to improve. Now that I am a very different person than I was when I took this snapshot, how can I be better? How can I improve? And you like focus on that, and don't let the negativity get you down or depress you or all of that, because it's just a little glimpse at your life, but you're going to keep making more and more glimpses. I mean, one book, 5 books, 100 books, each one of those is a peek at who you are, but not even all of them can encapsulate all you are.
that's true. Yeah, I liked how Ryan Cahill put it, which he's been a big inspiration for me. The reason I chose to go indie in the first place, just watching his journey. But like, I really liked how, I think at one point there was a question of like, would he go back and make major edits to the first book that he wrote? And he was kind of like, no, like me fixing spelling or whatever, fine, but like, he just was like, I want my books to reflect my growth as an author. So understanding that, it definitely wasn't a perfect book by any means, but I can learn from my mistakes and keep growing and making each book better, and that's his goal. And so it did kind of give me that, like, okay, try my best, of course, to make the first book as good as I can, but, it's just going to reflect, like you said, who I was as a writer at that time. It's not me. And it's, hopefully something that you can keep working on.
Mm-hmm. And even if your first book is the absolute worst book in the world, you can just get better. Yeah, you
Yeah.
got more books in you. You got more stories in you. People who put everything that they have and everything that they are into their first book and kind of hang their entire hopes on it. Sorry. They kind of shoot themselves in the foot, kind of like spending all of your money on a book, right? If you bankrupt yourself on the one book, what you're failing to do is take into account the longevity of your author career. You're going to love writing. You're going to love telling stories. You're going to hate the business side of things, but you're going to love the actual art of it. So prepare yourself to do that art for decades. That means being smart with your money, being smart with your time, with your energy, with your emotional investment, and think, okay, this is just one book. I've got another 50 in me. I can be so much better. Even if my first one is garbage, even my first 10 are garbage, by book 50, I could be an amazing writer. And if you kind of keep that in your head, then those little, the blips in your career are going to be exactly that. They're just going to be obstacles that you overcome to ultimately succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I know Brandon Sanderson talks a lot about that too, of his, he wrote, I think it was like 10 at least books before he published
13 or
Mistborn,
15
and
or
it was
something.
like, yeah, it's a lot of writing, and like if you just love what you're doing and you're willing to constantly just keep growing and trying to finding ways to make yourself better. I mean, it's totally possible.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's honestly, it's the norm. Like nobody, like unless like maybe Patrick Rothfuss, right? People say like he was just kind of out the gate, wrote like an amazing book, but that's not normal. So,
but even
don't
then,
hold yourself to that standard.
Even then, The Name of the Wind has a ton of negative reviews. One of my all-time favorite books, Lies of Locke Lamora, a ton of negative reviews. Way of Kings, a ton of negative reviews. No art is ever perfect for everybody. So that was such a pivotal moment for me. I read some reviews and I was like, man, I really wish that I was better as an artist so that I could give these people what they wanted. And then I looked, I don't know what inspired me to look at the Goodreads page for the Lies of Locke Lamora. And at the time, I think it was like a 3.75 out of 5. And it had thousands of reviews and thousands of them were negative. And I was like, oh my God, I love this book. I hold it up as one of the greatest sort of book ones of any fantasy series in the last 20 or 30 years. If people can find something to complain about this, I am almost absolved of guilt. Somebody's going to find something to complain about my books, and that's fine. I can live with that.
Yeah, I've heard that angle too, and I do like that. It's like, go look at your favorite book and find the negative reviews. I'm like, it's gonna happen.
I mean, Lord of the Rings, people still hate about the the walking and the Tom Bombadil. So, if Tolkien gets 1 star, well, who are we to be better than Tolkien, right?
Right. It is okay. All right. So you published with a publisher initially, and then you decided to go self-publishing. So when you switched to fully self-publishing, I know that self-publishing at that point, like 10 years ago, it was kind of already starting to gain traction, but it still wasn't fully like what it is today, where it's just like it's happening so much.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of go of self-publishing and figuring out how to just market your books, get them out into the world, get reviews, and all of those sorts of things?
So when I decided that it was going to be better for me to do it myself, I learned advertising and marketing. Like I went deep on that. I already had a website, I already had some social media stuff, but I learned Facebook advertising, Amazon advertising. I learned what marketing actually meant, how to market there wasn't a whole lot of resources back then, that used sort of free and inexpensive things for authors, but I found some and I did my best and to learn it. And then I reached out to the publishers and asked for the rights back so I could publish. And because of a number of factors, the series wasn't selling very well, because of covers, because of the launch schedule, because of a bunch of different things. So the publisher was happy to let the rights revert to me, rather than, because I told them, look, this is going to be a 6-book series. So either you're committing to publishing all 6 or you're giving me my rights back. And so they gave me my rights back. And that was when I went through the whole process of learning cover design and getting new covers made and really understanding what covers worked for the market and which ones didn't, and used all that information to basically leverage the success of the series. So for anybody who is thinking about publishing, whether self-publishing or going through an indie press or even trad publishing, learn advertising and marketing. Whether you use it or not, just learn it, because it will give you so much more power and so many more options.
Yeah, I mean, even trad today, I know like a lot of trad published authors are still having to do a lot of that marketing and stuff themselves, especially if they're not a big name. So yeah, definitely useful, even if it's one of the less fun parts of writing and publishing a book.
But you know what? You can find ways to make it fun.
Yeah.
You like if you can kind of wrap your head around advertising and marketing as being the way that you're going to reach people most effectively, and you can find a way to sort of be genuine in the way that you do it, right? Whether it's so I'm very active on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, because those are the platforms that I understand. And the one thing that keeps it from getting boring is that I just do things that I'm excited by, whether it's talking about books that excite me or talking about the sort of the deeper human themes behind my books. Finding the ways to market yourself that you are happy to do or you're excited by, then it's not going to feel like a slog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so at what point did it feel like everything started to click? Like how many years in? And I guess we can talk about, because obviously after you started self-publishing, you kind of had to go back and learn and kind of start over to a certain degree. But where did it feel like you kind of found that rhythm of writing consistently, putting books out there, marketing, getting, constant, consistent sales and all that?
So I'd say I hit my writing groove fairly well by 2017. Even 2016, I was writing pretty consistently, and putting out a steady stream of words, even if the publishers were releasing the books more slowly. But I had the books done and written, and I had time enough to also invest in the studying the business side of things and all of that. All of that led to my getting the rights back in early 2018. And then mid 2018 was when I published everything myself. I published The Hero of Darkness, which was the redone version of Blade of the Destroyer. And then I also republished Child of the Night Guild, the Queen of Thieves series in like right around the same time. And the Hero of Darkness series took off like within 3 weeks after publishing. It was a bestseller. Within 3 months, I'd made more money than I dreamed could even be made. Like the first day, it was interesting. I moved my family to Canada, and I launched the book the day before I flew. Ahead of my family. I was coming here to Canada to scope it out, to rent a house and all of that. So I get on the plane, it's the release day. I land at like 11 o'clock at night, get to my sister-in-law's house, and I check my internet, and I'm like, oh, there's a mistake. I think Amazon says that I sold like $800 worth of books today. I'm sure it's a mistake. I will, message them in the morning and figure it out. And the next day it was like $1,100 worth of books in one day. And I had no idea what was going on. And it turned out that the book, it had hit the algorithms, and it hit advertising, and it hit the reading, like it just hit. And so it did insanely well. So that was when things started to, let's say, click a bit more, because I had done all the research, all the legwork. I made a huge mistake with the relaunch of the Queen of Thieves series, where I put on new covers and I released it under my own name, but I asked Amazon to copy the reviews over from the publisher's page. So then Amazon treated it like it was the same product, not a new product. So the series never took off. Like it never succeeded because of that. So that was a huge mistake that I made right after huge success. So, everything that I've done has kind of been that, one step forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back, just learning and grinding. And I have written 6 series in total. A 7th is coming in the next year or so. And, some of them have succeeded. Some of them have succeeded very well. Some of them have, done well for a time and then kind of faded into obscurity. But everything was a new lesson in just, the marketing game, the publishing game, trying to improve and grow.
Yeah, that's fair. That's cool. Well, you just mentioned one mistake that you made kind of there with the Queen of Thieves, but were there any other kind of major mistakes or just hurdles that you had felt kind of early on in your career?
So one thing that was a bit of an obstacle to overcome, let's say, was in 2018 when I launched. Photo manipulation covers were pretty much the standard, right? Where a character, a real life character from a photo mixed up with all the fantasy artwork and stuff, totally normal. By 2019, it had gone kind of obsolete, where it was all like the 3D rendering. It's called DAZ, like those, the very 3D characters. And by 2020, it was all digital illustration. Like the trend moved that fast. So the covers that absolutely worked in 2018 by 2020 were DOA. So I had to go back, and that's when I relaunched Darkblade with this, because this is an evergreen cover that will always look good. And that's something that I learned. But it was when I went back to relaunch Darkblade, it was because I written up to book 7 of the Hero of Darkness series, and I knew I needed to write more, but I wanted to write other things to try to hit different genres. So I went to young adult, I went to military fantasy, I did sci-fi, and then I came back to Darkblade, and the series wasn't selling at all. So I knew that if I tried to launch the book into a book 8 in a series that the book 1 wasn't really selling, then it would just be a huge flop. So I had to go through the whole process of getting new covers, but then also I knew that I couldn't re-release the same book, and the book needed to be made better. I knew I could do better. So I went through rewriting it to where I took what was 7 books and I condensed them into 4.5 books, and they're all about this thick, because it's a lot of story, but removing sort of pieces that I loved but weren't necessary, or combining storylines to be more fluid and effective, getting rid of a bunch of rookie mistakes. And in relaunching Darkblade, it was a huge gamble, because no one had ever done this before. No one had ever taken a series that had done well, that had sold well, and then overhauled it, basically rebooted it and relaunched it. So I still don't know of anybody who has. So taking this gamble, I mean, it's the closest I've ever come to being paralyzed, because I was like, I don't know if I'm making a huge mistake and all of that. And I got through it, and thankfully, the story holds up. Darkblade is still even after relaunching it, it continues to be my bestseller. It's the one I'm best known for. So it proved to be the right choice, but it was definitely a massive obstacle that it was like, to this day, I still don't know how I managed to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's wild to change that much of something you'd already put in that much time and books into.
Yeah.
And that's cool, because I was going to actually ask about that, because you mentioned changing the title at least 3 times, I think, right?
Yeah. So it was called The Last Bucellari. Bucellari is the name of the half demon race. And when I changed it, people were like, what the fuck's a Bucellari? Like, why, what even is this title? So I was like, okay, fine. We got to come up with an easier title. And then Darkblade, Hero of Darkness. That is like keyword, just gold, right? Hero, Darkness, and then Dark Blade, Assassin. It's just like all the best keywords into one title. And it worked really well. And then when it came time to do it again, I wanted to keep Darkblade, because that was just a really, really powerful word. And then Assassin has to be the first title, because that tells you exactly what it is. So that's why it became Darkblade, and then book 1 is Assassin.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And it's cool that we talked about that, because it's actually a conversation I've been having with a few different people, as far as like my cover and why I'm having issues. And I think that I actually talked to Noah Brisk. If you know Noah Brisk Reviews, I know you do, but for anyone else out there, amazing dude, great book influencer. Go find him on
second best
Instagram.
Second best Instagrammer.
Second best, fine. But yeah, we were talking about like the difference between covers, and like different people prefer, different art styles, and how you said how the trends change so quickly in those earlier years. And that's definitely something for indie authors, if you're not yet published, to really take into consideration, because that is a huge piece of like just getting people to pay attention. Like if you can't get people to pay attention, like there's not much else is going to help that, other than just 100%. Making connections and getting people to want to, go past initial glance.
Well, I'll tell you what, the covers do 70 to 80% of the heavy lifting for you. A great cover can sell a mediocre book, but a mediocre cover cannot sell the best book in the world.
Yeah.
Like there are exceptions to that rule. I will say that always, but as a general rule, if your cover is mediocre, people are just going to drift past it because there are so many beautiful covers out there right now. And especially now more than ever with all the, deluxe editions and all of that, a mediocre cover is going to do your book so much harm.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. All right. Well, I think we just about covered most of the questions, and we're running up on an hour here. So let's just kind of wrap this up for a few minutes. So first off, where can people find your books and find you?
Yeah, so you can find all of my books. They're on my website. You can see my name down here. That's how you spell it, andypeloquin.com. It's all signed copies, shelf trophies. There are some ebooks and all that. There's some audio books. Most of my series are Amazon exclusive. There is a suggested reading order on the books page because all of the series they kind of start with Darkblade and they all interconnect. The characters, they cross over. It's kind of like Marvel Comics. Once you're in, you're not going anywhere. So that's where you can check it out. You can also find me on Instagram talking, fantasy books, very rarely my own, and TikTok as Andy Peloquin Author. That's where I hang out a lot. That's pretty much it.
All right, sweet. And for any other authors out there, especially indie authors, what would be like your top 2 to 3 pieces of advice?
Okay, I will repeat the one piece of advice that I think more authors need to hear is that this is a long game. You are not flaming up and burning out. You are going to marathon this. So take your time. Once your book is written and edited and ready to go, give yourself a year. Give yourself a year to learn advertising and marketing and cover design and newsletter and build a social media audience and picking other authors' brains about how to do, sort of a building buzz. Do all the things that you can because this book is just the first piece of the empire that will be your author career. So make sure that you do it right and make sure that you've got the information that you can keep building that empire one day, one book at a time.
Sweet. That's a great piece of advice. Definitely don't let your first book define what you decide to do.
And don't, for the love of God, don't make your social media title the name of your book or series. That is the biggest mistake because that's just one book or series. And then you're going to write something else and all of a sudden you've lost all your brand recognition. Make it your name and that's all you need.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you, Andy, very much for this conversation. Personally, I found it very interesting and some good information. Hopefully other people will as well. And hopefully some readers out there, if they are watching this, got to know you just a little bit better.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.